Alright, we are plugging along here with Chapter 9. We are going to talk about types of muscle fibers in this video, and I believe also development and regeneration of muscle tissue. So we've got some different types of muscle fibers we're going to talk about here, fast and slow twitch muscle fibers, and then we will move on. This is a pretty short section. So there are three main types of skeletal muscle fibers. There are slow oxidative, also called slow twitch muscle fibers. These are going to be muscle fibers that contract relatively slowly, so slower than our other types of fibers. And these are going to use something called aerobic respiration to produce ATP. Aerobic respiration is going to require oxygen in order to produce that energy source, that ATP molecule. All right. Fast oxidative fibers, or fast twitch muscles, these are going to be fibers that have really fast contractions. They are also going to use aerobic respiration to get ATP, but these are going to tire out or fatigue a lot more quickly than our slow oxidative muscle fibers, because they have to switch to anaerobic respiration, which is not going to require oxygen to produce energy. But that can cause these muscle fibers to tire a lot more quickly, because that anaerobic respiration is going to lead to some other byproducts like lactic acid that are going to be pretty toxic to the muscles, and they run out of that energy really quickly, because it's also not going to produce that ATP as quickly as anaerobic or aerobic respiration does, sorry. And then we have something called fast glycolytic fibers. These are also going to have really, really fast contractions. These specifically use anaerobic glycolysis, though, to produce energy. So this is a little different than that fast oxidative fiber, because the fast oxidative fibers can start off with that aerobic respiration before switching to anaerobic respiration later on, and before they fatigue more quickly. Fast glycolytic fibers are not going to start off with that aerobic respiration. They are going to start off and exclusively use anaerobic glycolysis, which is not utilizing that oxygen to get energy. These are going to fatigue the fastest out of all three of these types of muscle fibers. Most of the muscles in our body are going to contain all three of these types of fibers, but the proportions, so the number of each of these types of fibers, is going to vary between muscles and in between people. All right. So that contraction speed, is specifically dependent on how quickly the myosin is going to detach from that cross bridge. So there's an enzyme called ATPase that is going to break down that ATP that gets attached to myosin to make that cross bridge action. So the faster fibers are going to have that enzyme hydrolyzing and detaching ATP about twice as fast as the slow twitch fibers, and that's going to lead to that much faster cross bridge cycling, pulling those thin filaments towards the center at a much faster rate. But this is going to use up ATP really, really quickly, because it's going to blow through all of that energy stores very, very fast, which is why those fibers tire out a lot more fast than the slow oxidative fibers do. And so we're going to end up with those slow oxidative fibers being muscles that have a little bit more endurance. So they're going to be able to hold weights for a longer period of time, or keep doing those contractions for longer periods of time. And so there are benefits and disadvantages to all of these, obviously. There's varying waste products that get produced, and varying times and situations where each of these are going to come in handy or not be as helpful. And so For example, people who train a lot of endurance type activities, so marathon runners or any type of distance runner, people who do like triathlons and stuff like that, they need a lot of endurance. They need those muscle fibers that are going to not tire out as quickly, and so they actually end up having those slow oxidative fibers kind of grow a bit more and are the ones that are performing most of that muscle contraction. So it's not going to kick out the other two types of muscle fibers within that single muscle, but those slow oxidative fibers are going to be developed a lot more because they're being used a lot more. Whereas people who are doing a lot more of like short bursts of activity, so sprinters, weightlifters, stuff like that, are going to have a lot more of these faster oxidative and fast glycolytic fibers because they're not needing to sustain those contractions for quite as long. And so those fast oxidative and fast glycolytic fibers are going to grow a bit more. And do a lot more of the work of whatever particular muscle is being used. And so there's pros and cons to all of these again, and they're all useful in some way, shape, or form. So even for weightlifters that are going to have more developed fast oxidative and fast glycolytic fibers, you still need some of those slow oxidative fibers to enable you to actually finish an entire workout and not just tire out within 5 or 10 minutes, right? And so all of these are going to be beneficial in some capacity, and you should be trying to train all of these different muscle fibers in some capacity. But depending on activities and the exact genetics of each individual person, some people are going to have more of one particular type of fiber in certain muscles than other people are. All right. Okay, let's wrap up by talking about the development and regeneration of muscle tissue. So this section also isn't super long, so it shouldn't take too terribly long to finish out this video. So skeletal muscles develop from the mesoderm layer. There are special cells called somites. Skeletal muscles in the head and limbs, so arms and legs, develop from general mesoderm, so not these somites, so a little bit different development start, but we are still getting cells from that mesoderm. Somites are going to result in a cell type called myoblasts, and as we've seen in other units, any cell type that ends in blast is usually going to be some type of stem cell. So myoblasts are special muscle-forming stem cells, so these are stem cells that know they're going to become some type of muscle cell. They don't know exactly which type of muscle cell, though. These myoblasts can fuse together to form something called a myotube, and this is why we end up with skeletal muscle cells being multinucleated, because each of the nuclei from a single myoblast, as these fuse together into the myotube, they're going to keep all of those nuclei and save them long term, and they're going to stick around to that mature skeletal muscle cell in the long run. All right, so that's how we get the nucleus of those multiple nuclei in a single muscle cell. And this can be a really big benefit because the nucleus is what's controlling the proteins that are produced and the energy being produced and stuff. So it does make a lot of sense why we would need multiple nuclei in skeletal muscle. Regeneration of muscle tissue comes from a special type of cell called satellite cells. They are going to be associated with these skeletal muscle cells. They're going to be bound up together in those layers of connective tissue that we talked about in the first video. So that endomesium and paramesium is going to contain these satellite cells as well. These satellite cells, their job is to help maintain the skeletal muscle cells. They're going to help with protein synthesis for repairing and growing muscle cells. So we need protein to keep building those muscles. And they can help regenerate or reconstruct muscle fibers to a limited extent, so they can help a little bit with repairing very, very, very damaged, like torn muscles, but they're mostly going to help repair kind of general, everyday type of damage in those living cells. All right. Something called fibrosis can happen in muscle cells if it's damaged to a great extreme, so further than what can be repaired by those satellite cells, and then those muscle fibers are going to get replaced by scar tissue. So a lot of that collagen that we talked about with scar tissue in the tissues chapter, so obviously that's not going to be as flexible as our original muscle cells. It's not going to contract and relax the same way that the muscle cells do. So this can cause a lot of issues with muscle function if we've damaged those muscles to that extent. And again, this is things like torn muscles. This is not from everyday wear and tear or even most weightlifting. Certain types of weightlifting more than is reasonable and safe for a person at that particular point in time, obviously can lead to muscle tears and stuff like that. So if you're a weightlifter, be smart about it. Don't try to push yourself too much. Pushing yourself a little bit is very reasonable and very helpful in your training. Pushing too much can lead to a lot more issues than benefits. All right. Because we do not want those muscle fibers being replaced by that scar tissue, that inflexible scar tissue that's not going to contract and relax the way the muscle cells do, and is also not going to have that same flexibility. All right. So those scar tissue fibers are not helpful. It's going to lead to impaired muscle function. All right, there is more about muscle regeneration in this chapter, but I'm going to make a note to revisit this later on in the semester. The rest of what's talked about in this section talks about smooth muscle cells and cardiac muscle regeneration, and I'm going to talk about that in more detail when we actually cover those units later in the semester.